Karen Davila's most powerful subject is often not the person sitting across from her. It is the space between a question and an answer. That space can hold hesitation, anger, performance, silence, and the sudden possibility that a carefully prepared public image will not survive contact with a follow-up question. Davila has built a career inside that space, first through broadcast journalism and then through a YouTube channel where the interviewer herself becomes impossible to ignore. This creates a useful tension. A journalist is supposed to make the story visible, not become the story. A YouTube creator, by contrast, is expected to bring a recognizable personality, a point of view, and a reason to return. Davila's channel lives between those two expectations. It asks viewers to trust her, because she has journalistic authority. But it also asks them to stay, because she has a personality. The question is not whether she is still a journalist online. The question is what happens to journalism when the journalist becomes part of the product. Her interviews are built around a particular kind of pressure. She does not only invite a guest to explain a life or a position, she asks the guest to account for it. A celebrity must explain a relationship. A politician must explain a decision. A parent must explain a wound. And an entrepreneur must explain the story behind success. The question becomes a small test of responsibility. It says that a public life is not only something to display, it is something that can be examined. That style can look aggressive when it is separated from context. A clip exchange travels faster than the conversation that produced it. A raised eyebrow can become a meme. An interruption can be recut as proof of arrogance or courage. The digital audience may encounter through a complete interview, but through a moment that has already been selected for conflict. Her authority is therefore always being edited by other people. The interviewer asks the question, but the internet decides what the question will mean. This is one reason her move to YouTube is more significant than a simple change of platform. In traditional television, the network supplies much of the authority. There is a newsroom, a schedule, a recognizable program, and an institutional identity behind the anchor. On YouTube, the channel carries the name of the host. The audience enters through a thumbnail, a title, a face, and the promise that the conversation will be worth its runtime. The journalist is no longer only the person delivering the interview. She is the destination. Davila has spoken about feeling uncertain when she first entered a platform associated with younger creators. That uncertainty reveals the cultural assumption YouTube was built around, that online intimacy belongs to people who make their private lives available without the protective distance of a newsroom. Davila had to translate a professional skill into a medium that rewards informality. She could not rely only on the tone of a studio interview. She had to make the audience feel that they were not simply watching a journalist work, but spending time with a person. That decision is the heart of the interview. A question can be technically correct and still fail because it arrives without empathy. Another question can sound gentle while quietly steering a guest toward a conclusion. Interviewing is never neutral choreography. The host chooses the pace, the order, the follow-up, the moment to challenge, and the moment to let silence continue. Davila's visible presence makes that choreography easier to study. We can see how authority is performed through eye contact, timing, repetition, and the refusal to let an answer end the conversation too soon. Davila has resisted the idea that a woman in media should be reduced to appearance, softness, or a single acceptable personality. That resistance matters because the camera has historically demanded that women perform approachability before they are allowed to perform authority. Her interviews insist that competence does not have to arrive with a smile, and empathy does not require surrendering control of the conversation. She can challenge a guest and still make room for vulnerability. The tension is not a defect, it is the work. But the work becomes more complicated when it is packaged for online attention. YouTube rewards the moment of revelation. The confession, the confrontation, the unexpected answer, the phrase that can become a short clip. A long conversation is compressed into a promise of payoff. Titles announce transformation, heartbreak, secret, healing, or a final answer. The interview remains a conversation, but it also becomes a piece of packaging, competing against every other piece of content in the feed. That double role creates an ethical question. When does making a story accessible become making a person legible for consumption? A politician who faces a difficult question may be held accountable, but may also receive a viral moment that becomes more important than the answer. Visibility can serve the public, yet visibility can also flatten people into the most clickable version of themselves. Davila's strongest interviews resist that flattening by allowing contradictions to remain. A guest can be successful and still uncertain. A parent can be loving and still exhausted. A public figure can apologize and still fail to satisfy everyone. The camera does not have to produce a clean verdict. It can preserve the awkward middle where a person is trying to explain a life that does not fit neatly into a headline. That is where interview journalism becomes more than information gathering. It becomes an argument for complexity. That is difficult because online trust is often confused with agreement. A journalist is praised as credible when she asks the question a viewer wanted asked, then accused of bias when she asks a different question with the same intensity. Davila's public image has moved through that cycle. Her questions have attracted both respect and harassment, especially when she challenged powerful figures. The controversy becomes part of the story, and the journalist has to defend not only the accuracy of the reporting, but the legitimacy of asking. The pressure is not merely personal. It reveals how journalism functions in a polarized environment. Every question is interpreted through a political identity before the answer is heard. A request for accountability becomes an attack. A clarification becomes a defense. A pause becomes evidence of hidden intent. In that environment, the interviewer's authority cannot depend on universal approval. It has to depend on process, preparation, evidence, fairness, and the willingness to ask a difficult question even when the audience would prefer an easier one. Familiarity is not the same as accountability. A host can be transparent about the process without making her whole life available for inspection. A journalist can build trust through consistency rather than total disclosure. The audience learns how she listens, what she follows up, and which subjects she treats with care. Trust grows from repeated choices. It does not require the viewer to believe that the host has no private boundary. The danger is not that journalists become personalities. The danger is that personality becomes a substitute for method. A familiar face can make an audience feel informed even when the evidence is thin. A confident question can create the impression of rigor without doing the work of verification. Davila's credibility is strongest when the performance of certainty is supported by preparation. The camera can show confidence, but only the reporting can earn trust. This is why the interviewer Becoming the story should not be understood as vanity. It can be a form of accountability. When the host is visible, viewers can examine her assumptions, her habits, and her blind spots. They can ask whether the same standard is applied to every guest. They can notice which stories receive warmth and which receive suspicion. The journalist is not above the frame. She is inside it, and that makes the frame easier to question. Karen Davila's work sits in that exposed position. She is expected to be rigorous, but accessible, authoritative but human, direct but fair, recognizable but not self-absorbed. No single interview can satisfy all of those demands. The value of the channel is that it lets us watch the negotiation. It shows that journalism is not a perfect voice descending from nowhere. It is a practice carried out by a person, under pressure, in front of an audience that is always ready to judge the question before the answer arrives. The final question, then, is not whether Karen is still a journalist on YouTube. It is whether YouTube can remain a place where journalism is more than the personality delivering it. Her channel offers a provisional answer. The personality is the door, but the method has to be the room. The click may come from recognition, curiosity, or controversy. The work begins after the click, when a guest is allowed to be more complicated than the headline, and a viewer is asked to care about more than the clip. An interviewer becomes the story the moment we stop pretending that questions come from nowhere. That moment can weaken journalism if it turns authority into celebrity. It can strengthen journalism if it makes authority visible enough to examine. Karen Davila's most important contribution online is not that she has made journalism feel personal. It is that she reminds us the personal has always been part of the method. Every question carries a history, a risk, and a responsibility. And when the camera turns back toward the person asking, the responsibility does not disappear. It finally has a face.